Hi, I'm Elma Teresa Sibi. We are going to do the video presentation of the Assessment for International Political Economy, LB 5236. The members of the group are myself, Nikhil Nair, Karan Modi, Ravneet Kaur, and Rachel Joy. We will be discussing about how mining is an integral part of Australia's legacy and how it has shaped the socio-economic, politic, political and cultural past and present and future of the country. I will start with the first topic, mining and introduction. With land rich in resources like silver, copper, and gold, it is inevitable that Australia would be shaped by its mining history. Early colonization by UK in mid 17th led to establishment of the first colonies in Australia. During the 1840s, silver and copper were discovered, which led to the immigration of skilled miners and smelters, especially from the UK. With the discovery of gold in 1851, much bigger immigration of people occurred, especially during the gold rush of Victoria, a newly developed colony. The gold rush was so large and frequent that by the end of 1850s, Australia produced about 40% of world's gold. With the influx of so many miners and their families, they started to rise inevitable tensions with the colonial authority of the UK, as well as racial and ethnic flare-ups. Two of the riots we will discuss are the Eureka Rebellion and the Labbing Flat riots. The riots are important because they influence the policy of Australia for decades, and their effects are seen even now in history, culture, and socio-economic politics of present-day Australia. Now, I will hand over to my colleague Ravneet Kaur for the next topic.
Thank you, Elma. Now I'll be talking about how mining led to the beginning of democracy in the country. The most important riot, which many consider being the birth of democracy in Australia, is the Eureka Rebellion of Ballarat, where gold miners objected to the rising cost of mining licenses and taxation through such fees that was without representation, revolted against the local authorities as well. The rebellion, which occurred on 3rd of December 1854, was crushed almost immediately, but widespread public support for the miners led to the major policy reform as well as pardons for the miners themselves. This eventually paved the way for the formation of a government for the people and by the people in Australia. Many miners who took part in this rebellion eventually went on to form part of the democratic government that followed the event. The rebellion also started a general movement to separate Australia from the monarchy of the UK and support from self-governance. A large part of the resources mined in Australia were being shipped off to the UK as it was considered to be the property of the monarchy. Eventually, this, along with a sense of nationalism among native born Australians, led to the formation of Australia as a federal parliamentary constitutional monarchy on the 1st of January 1901. This uprising can also be tied to the rise of trade unions in the 1850s in Australia, with almost 400 unions being formed in that decade alone to protect workers' rights and rallying for 8-hour workdays. Now I hand over the control to Nikhil for further explanation.
Thank you, Ravneet. I will now be speaking about the second most important riot in Australian history, which informed the government policy for many years to come. And this would be the Lambing Flat riots. Now, xenophobia played a large role in the build-up to this riot, and it was against mostly Chinese miners who in the 1850s started coming to Australia because of all the gold rushes and the mining boom. Now, these Chinese miners tended to be much more organized, disciplined, and they were very used to the hard work required to extract gold from the alluvial soils which were present at that point in the gold fields. The Australian and British miners, on the other hand, they used to not be so organized. And at times, they used to do a thing where if they heard about a better field at one point, they just abandon the field they were working on and go, which usually meant that they would find no gold in both places. Now, this obviously led the Chinese to be much more successful than their Australian and British counterparts who were working along with them. This also caused a lot of competition and resentment to grow over many years, which finally resulted in the Lambing Flat riots, which in reality was not just one or two riots, but happened over the course of one whole year. The riot started sometime in November 1860 and ended in towards the end of September 1861. And they occurred in the Burrangong goldfield in New South Wales. Here, in this field, there were about 2,000 Chinese miners who were trying to sift and find some gold. Knowing this, around 3,000 miners, Australian miners, formed a collective and started ransacking the equipments of the Chinese miners and started forcing them to leave the fields. Obviously, the police did try to intervene at one point, but they were not very successful because they were completely overwhelmed. Eventually, they had to bring in some soldiers, sailors, and more police from the other the other colonies to try and crush this riot. They did this, and with prejudice, I might add, they arrested most of the leaders, hanged a few of them, and completely shut down the operations for a while. They gave some protection to the Chinese miners to allow them to go ahead and do their mining. But this racial and xenophobic resentment stayed over and resulted in the Immigration Act of 1901, which was passed by the federal government of Edmund Barton and was drafted by Australia's second Prime Minister, Mr. Alfred Deakin. This happened after the formation of the Federation of Australia in 1901. Basically, this act was also known as the White Australia Policy and was a set of policies that aimed to forbid people of non-European ethnic descent, especially the Asians and the Pacific Islanders, from immigrating to Australia. Now, this policy was pretty much set in stone and survived a couple of decades till the Second World War. After the Second World War, successive governments decided to dismantle this policy and allow for non-white immigration to assist in the rebuilding of the country after the Second World War. At this point in time, Australia has let go of its xenophobic past, and its current immigration policy allows for immigration without any kind of discrimination or prejudice. But this is a history that happened, and it existed for over 20 years. So it will forever be a stain on Australia's history. I now invite Rachel to explain the next topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Now I will explain the present scenario of mining in Australia. At present, mining still plays an important part in Australia's economy and politics. Trade unions that started among miners have endured and led to reforms that ensured a specialized capitalist economy for Australia. During the 90s, Keating and Howard governments changes were enacted that abolished the all regulations that forced determination of salaries, state ownership of infrastructure and services, and socialized restrictions on household credit. This gave rise to a specialized form of capitalism, which is known as regulatory state capitalism. In a nutshell, this means the government owns most of the industries that they run as a profit maximizing ventures as opposed to an institution that maximizes social welfare. A consequence of this form of capitalism is the decline of the unions in the early 80s from a high of 52% to around 15% at present. Now I hand over to Karan Modi for the conclusion.
Thank you, Rachel. I will now be talking about the present scenario of mining and what significance it holds in the Australian economy. The importance of mining at present in Australia is a far cry from its peak in the mid 19th century. Regulations, the decline in unions, and the rise of environmentalism have caused a steady decline in this industry. From an environmental point of view, this is necessary. The damages are done to historical goldfields such as those in Ballarat and Bendigo due to the leftover arsenic from gold extraction still poses a huge risk to humans, flora, and fauna in those areas. Another vivid example is how Queenstown's mountains in Tasmania have still not recovered from the massive logging done on them. Australia's dependence on coal for electricity is also of great concern. However, Australia has moved on largely from its dependence on mining. Australia is a highly developed marketing economy and has had consistent economic growth at least pre-COVID. About 63% of its GDP is from the public sector, which also employs about 80% of its workforce. Mining still plays a substantial part in its economy, contributing 9% of its GDP during the mining boom of 2009-10. Australia's economy is highly liberalized and financially deregulated. Its two main political parties are the Labour Party and the Liberal Party. Both parties have roughly the same views on mining and are supportive of them. Both parties have benefited from donations from the mining industry. In conclusion, mining has shaped Australia, its history, politics, culture, and socio-economics. Historical mining rights have reformed policymaking over the years, and some of these have endured in the 20th century. The mining lobbies still have considerable political clout and will play an important role in the future of Australia for years to come. Thus, to conclude this entire video presentation, mining has been the architect of Australia and still has a significant role in Australia's economic growth and development. Thank you.